We're dealing with serious stuff here. We're dealing with gaming, and today we're talking once again about my 10th level paladin. And my buddy Ben got really jealous that Mike got to be on the show, so he begged me. He said, "I really want to be on your fantastic podcast that's so professional, Jim." Everybody, Ben Woerner or Ben David? How should I introduce you?
Ben Woerner is
Because
fine.
yeah, because I know you try to hide your identity on Facebook. And
Yeah,
did I just out you?
you just outed me to millions of people, and no longer will I be able to go into the teaching profession here in the near future. So it's okay.
I wish I felt bad about it, but I don't. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't feel
no,
anything at all.
yeah, okay. I mean, I'm broken up about it. So
Let's get right to it, Ben. Tell me about your
sure.
favorite character.
So I'm a kind of a perpetual GM, and I haven't had a lot of chances to play games myself, although I've had a few memorable ones. And when we were talking the other day about like characters, like a favorite character, it took me a long time to really come up with something. And finally, I decided that I think one of my favorite characters, because it's like children, there's no like specific one, I don't think. I love them all, and they're all different. Is this character I played called the Admiral? I believe his last name was Mondragon. Mondragon. I played him for 4 hours total, and he was in a LARP, and it was the most intense gaming experience I've ever experienced in my life. It felt like 45 minutes, and the whole experience was probably a little bit over 5 hours, although the game time was exactly 4 hours. It was a Battlestar Galactica LARP, and I was the admiral in charge of the Battlestar.
Nice.
So I hadn't planned on playing in this LARP. The night before I had played in a Game of Thrones LARP with a group of gentlemen from a company, a LARPing group called Iocane Productions, which I think you know who they are.
Uh,
Um,
Trey and them
yeah,
and
Trey
Mark.
and Tom and Mark. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, they're good
um,
friends of mine.
yeah, and I had played in a Game of Thrones LARP that they had put on the night before, and they mentioned that they were doing a Battlestar Galactica LARP, and a bunch of the people at the Game of Thrones LARP was like, "You have to play the Battlestar Galactica LARP," and I was like, "Okay, fine." And they were like, "Well, so is there a character that you're interested in, or what sort of thing?" And I was like, I haven't like had a lot of chance to play. I like the whole because their LARPs are a little different. They're not just social. There's like different things you can do at their LARPs. There's like
Right. Right.
puzzle solving and different things like that. And I'm like, I kind of like the whole thing where I help like delegate responsibilities to different people and like help organize stuff. So I guess when I said that, they were like, okay. And the next day they handed me the admiral character, which was pretty cool. Um, but it was incredibly intense and just a really amazing experience that I had. And it wasn't just because of the character itself, but it was the people that I played um, in the game with. Like the other players, I think is really, um, I think, kind of like put it over the top for me.
I
Um,
I don't think you can be just a casual gamer and show up to one of their LARPs. I think they tend to attract people who are dedicated to what they're doing. So
yeah, like here's a good example. So at their games, one of the big things they have in a lot of their games is like a massive puzzle that can't be solved by one person.
right.
Um, all the characters get resources of different types. It could be like mechanical resources or social resources. And then on the wall, so let me set up the Battlestar Galactica LARP a little bit. They had about, I think, 40 players in a room designed for about 30 people, but they had set up the tables to make the room even more claustrophobic.
Right.
And uh, they normally would turn the air like super cold in these rooms, but they hadn't. So by the end of the LARP, I'm sweating.
Mhm.
I'd also worn this jacket that had like kind of like it was like fleece interior because it was like the closest thing I had to like looking like military-ish.
Right.
Uh, And so I was just a little warm from that. But then also like they turned the lights down, so it was like darker, and the whole thing felt like very like claustrophobic in a sense. And so it like intensified all the feelings and emotions that were going on. And they had also like taken tables and different like things to like cordon off the sections of the room. So I was like on the bridge for a long period of time. So they had this puzzle. Let's get back to that real quick. Um, that like if you've played a number of their games, you'll know that they put this puzzle out and there's like 2 or 3 solutions probably to this very complicated thing that they put out. And you have about enough resources in the game to do maybe one of them if you don't like mess around and try to like go a couple different directions. If you try to solve all the different ways, you'll fail at all of them. So you have to kind of stay focused. But this was my second time ever playing with them, and so I wasn't really aware of this. But neither was the guy that ended up being my third in command. Um, but he turned out to be a data analyst, like a data scientist of some sort, literally like a statistician. And we're setting the game up, and Mark, one of the game masters, comes over and starts explaining this whole thing. Like, your battle star is incredibly damaged. Here are all the parts of the ship that need to be repaired. Here's what you need for each of them. If you go look on the wall, there's these like pockets hanging on the wall, and they tell you the resources needed to bring stuff back online. So like your medical bay has been damaged, your engines have been damaged. These, all these different parts of the ship have been damaged. And to activate them, you need to do this. And here's a whole list. You have some resources. And as he's telling me this, the guy who's my third in command, because my second command was completely useless in an awesome way. He was like just one of my main antagonists in the game, which was fantastic. But he was completely useless to me as an actual effective uh, like person for doing stuff to like help my character in the game, right?
Right.
But he was awesome in the antagonistic way, which is sometimes a really fun thing to have in LARPs. But this guy had taken his character sheet, flipped it over, and had already gone around the room and written down every single resource needed for every single like function on the ship and every single part, and done some statistics, came back to me and said, here are your 2 options. The game hasn't even begun. We're like about 5-10 minutes from the game starting. And Mark looks at this guy's sheet, looks at me, looks at the guy, and goes, he understands this better than I do. Let him explain it to you. This guy's like, I just walked in here. I've never played one of your games before. And he's like, I get that, but you understand this better than I do. And he's like, oh. So I talked to him for, like right until the game begins. And I'm like, all right, when we start, you're going to be in charge of this. I'm putting you in charge of this. Your job is to, get all these resources and get this to make this happen. And he's like, seriously? I'm like, yeah, I'm giving you my authority to do this. If anyone disagrees with you, I'll have my head of security, who is another player, a guy named Scott, help you out to make sure that, because we had players who were playing like the security, like the ship security. And so he was like, oh okay. Um, and that ended up being like really fantastic. And a lot of fun. And the other 2 players that like really stood out for me as far as like empowering my character and like their story. I'd mentioned Scott, the head of my security. He literally saved my character's life like multiple times because there were Cylons on the ship, because we're playing Battlestar Galactica. And there were players who would like try to come on the ship, and there was a mad bomber who was a Cylon as well. And they could take a little timer with like a sticky tape thing and put it underneath any object in the room. And if the timer went off, you had to freeze where you are. And if you were within a certain number of steps, you were either dead, seriously injured, or fine if you were more than 4 steps away. Right. And if you were in a room that blew up, because they had all these tables designating off like rooms and whatnot, you were like always seriously injured at the very least, if not dead. And so he like had been in the military and had worked like military police, I believe. And so he immediately like set up an actual like security system with his players, who are his security guards, like the ship's Marines, on the thing to keep my character alive. And like I wanted to go out and like go talk to some people a couple times, and he's like, "Sir, it's not safe right now. The bomber's out there. We can't go out there." And like sure enough, I was like, "But I just want to go to the medical bay and talk to this very important like civilian who's like trying to run for president." And he's like, "Not right now. I'll bring them to you when they're better." I was like, "Okay, fine." 3 minutes later, the medical bay blows up.
Of course. Of course.
Right? Like the Mad Bomber had already set the bomb, and his, and so that was amazing. We also had Cylon attacks that were like constant, and every time we jumped, there was like another chance of Cylon attacks. And Scott's wife Bree, and Scott and Bree, like I didn't know them like before this LARP, and now I'm like they run games now themselves, and if I ever like see them at a Gen Con and they're like running a game or they're going to play in a game, I'm like, okay, so what games are you playing in? Because they're amazing. They give it their all when they play.
Yeah.
And Bree ended up being the CAG, the head of the fighters, like the fighter pilots,
Mhm.
and she organized them in amazing ways. And they had their own like mini game, which I think Mark was also running. Um, and Trey and Tom were both doing a lot of important stuff as well. But
Right.
like Mark was running this thing where they had a phone and there was like a little mini game you could play on it, and it had like these like VR goggles set up with the phone, so you put it up to your face and you're flying around and shooting down Cylon
Yep.
raiders, and that like she was doing amazing, and they were keeping us alive, and then we had this really intense moment, and I think one of the most intense moments where we knew we were jumping to this one place. We had to go there because we needed water and we needed fuel, and it was the only place we knew that had water and fuel. We also knew it had like 3 base stars, so it was going to be this intense where we have to get the stuff or we're going to die. But if we go here, there's a good chance we're still going to die. And Bree's like, okay, I know what I have to do. And she got her entire group of fighters, and they fought valiantly. And at the very last moment, she sacrificed herself to save our ship, and we escaped, and we lost her character. It was near the end of the game, and so I don't think she came back as another character, because that was one of the things you
Yeah.
could come back as like another. But like
Sure.
it was this really intense moment, and I remember right before we jumped, I called all the officers of the ship there and all the high-ranking civilians, and I gave this speech, and I've never done like this sort of thing like where I've been this like like I'm going to help this group or give these like dramatic speeches, and it felt like really intense. Like when I was done, I was like my whole body was like jangling with adrenaline, and everyone else was just like yeah and super pumped up, and it was fantastic. And then one of the last moments um, from that was that during that fight, when the fighters were off the ship, there were Cylon like landing craft trying to like board our ship, and Tom and Trey the night before, this is what I've learned after the words, had been talking to a guy who had been playing at the Game of Thrones LARP, who was a cosplayer. And what we didn't know was that he had a fully working 1980s Battlestar Galactica Cylon robot costume, like the shiny silver robots from the 80s with the little red light
Yeah.
going back and forth,
Yeah. Yeah.
sound effects and everything. So at one moment, they're like, a Cylon raider has hit the ship and it's about to unload Cylons. Everyone, get ready. And so all the Marines and like Scott's group are all at this. They have one door into this room. There's only one door at the far end of the room. So they have this door ready, and everyone's like set up. And we hear the sound and we're like, oh, that's cool. They've got the sound effect, and they're going to have like some players or like NPCs like come in. They open the doors. It's a set of double doors, and this guy walks in this full costume with his gun, and the sound just gets really loud. And we're like, "Holy crap!" It was just like everyone's like, "This is crazy," and and they fought him off. But it was still just this like amazing, intense moment. So at the
I
end of the thing, it was like I had felt like 45 minutes had passed, but it had been 4 hours.
right.
And there's even like more stuff I could tell you about, but I think I'll stop right there so you can ask me questions.
Well, I have so many because you covered so much ground.
Yeah.
I do want to say just a second. I've run lots of LARPs in my day, and we did something similarly with Werewolf once. We ran a Werewolf LARP, and I had dressed from head to toe in military gear. I even had a gas mask on, and we had everybody
Nice.
stop, and I pretended I had dropped from the ceiling, and I
Oh,
had a
that's
baseball
awesome.
bat in my hand and everything. We didn't hurt anybody or anything, but it was
Right,
all
right, right.
pathetic. And Mike and I ran that years ago. It was part of a long-running LARP storyline that we'd been doing at this con. So it was the
Nice.
entire NWAD, right? It was this entire World of Darkness. Um, and so this was the vampire part of it, where uh, the four horsemen are each of the different types of of parts of the World of Darkness.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah. Okay.
werewolves were war. We didn't have changelings because they're stupid. But but everybody else was some form. Death was
Right,
obviously wraith and so on. Anyway, I don't
right.
want to talk about me. I want to talk about you. What? Because you expressed an entire experience around this game, and I think that is great. And I love those guys. I love Trey and Mark and Tom. Uh,
Yeah,
I've known them for years. I know they put on good stuff. And I met Trey at a LARP. That's how I know him.
nice.
But he wasn't running it. It was somebody else's LARP, which was bad.
Right.
But what about the character? Tell me about the character itself. That a part and parcel from the experience. What attracted you to playing Admiral Mon? What was his name?
I think
Mondragon.
it was, yeah, I think it was Mondragon. It was basically a stand-in for Adama. I mean, they were all kind of like similar but slightly different, right? So it
Right.
wasn't, the Galactica. It was like, I think they had named it like the Andromeda or something like that. Um, but what I really liked about him was that he had all this responsibility he had to deal with,
Right.
um, and it was like a heavy weight, and there was like a lot of like riding on this guy's decisions, which I normally I don't play a lot of characters like that. I play like a lot of like if it's a leader character, it's like a kind of like, oh, I'll help everyone else out do stuff, right? Like kind of like, I don't want to say a bard, but sort of like that sort of thing, when you
Right.
play like D&D, like someone like that, right? Um, but this guy, he had a lot of like responsibility that he had to deal with, and I think I was looking for like a really serious LARP experience, because I had played a fair number of LARPs, but a lot of them had been really mediocre. The night before I had played a Game of Thrones LARP, but I had played. Oh, and this is the other thing, is I wanted to play someone who was like very good and had strong moral foundations.
Right.
Because the night before I had played, at kind of a request of a friend, I had played basically the most evil, like Pope in the Game of Thrones that I possibly could. And I like playing villains. Like, they're fun, right? Like, if I
Right.
didn't like playing villains, I wouldn't be a GM so often.
Right.
But like, this guy, it was just slimy. I had literally gotten a player angry at me because I was lying to their face, and the player knew, and I knew that they knew. Like, but my character was just this evil guy who had stolen all their money, like their entire house's money. We had gone in through the catacombs and like broken into their vault and stolen all of it. And I was lying to her face. We had nothing to do with it. And we had no idea. And the player got upset. And she's like, "You're lying to me. I know it." And like, she broke character. And Tom came running over and was like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And I had to break character, and I'm like, "I'm really sorry. This guy's a total asshole. I'm so sorry that you're finding out like, 30 minutes before the end of the game." Right. And I'm like, "I'm not trying to like, screw with you, the player. This is the guy. He's a total jerk." Right. He had come off as like the nicest grandpa ever, but in reality, he was just this evil, conniving jerk.
Right.
Um, and so I was like, okay, that was really intense, but I really don't want to play someone evil like that again, right? I want to play someone that's a good
Right.
guy and trying to help people,
Well,
And so
Mike
I think that was what I drew me to the guy, was because I wanted to play someone who was genuinely trying to do the right thing.
Mike and I talked about that a little bit about how the antagonist, how the villain sets the pace and tone of a story, and how important it is for
Hmm.
somebody to be in that role in a story, especially in a
Yeah.
LARP, because
Oh
LARPs
yeah.
are usually a lot of internal conflict.
Yeah.
Which,
Like,
okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, that's really funny that you mentioned that, because I played in a Houses of the Blooded LARP for 5, 6 years, I think. And I started when it was very new, and like I think I started when they first started it, and there were a couple sessions into it, and I was like, this is okay, but it's not doing great. So I sat down with a couple of the other players who were veteran LARPers, and I was like, look, we need a bad guy in this game. We need someone who's going to be a bad guy. And they're all like, well, okay, sort of. And I was like, so I ended up, we decided that we started a group, which we jokingly called the Evil League of Evil, off of, I think it was Dr. Horrible or whatever. But that wasn't in game, that was just out of game. And our whole
Right.
goal as players was to provide an antagonist for
Right.
the other players in the game. That's kind of our own sort of thing. And so my character at the time was probably the closest to being, potentially evil bad guy. I was the sorcerer king character named Caliban Rue. And so I went full evil, and it was fantastic, and had a great time, twirling my mustache at the players, and
Right.
and it was really, it really kicked the game up a notch. Like at that point, like suddenly people were like, oh, we're not just kind of milling around like messing with each other. We're now like, all right, here's someone we can oppose. And so there, a faction against me formed, but then people started joining my faction as well. And then this third faction formed that was like, we don't want to get involved with either of these things. And so it really like kicked the politics and the all that stuff up into high gear. And then finally, when my character was brought down by their right hand man, woman, I should say, who had been like the most pure character in the game and just wouldn't believe that I was an evil person, and she finally realized the truth, and she took us both in this like solace thing where like it doesn't kill you, kind of like encases you. Anyways, long story short, she did it in the least violent way possible by taking both of us out of the game, and it was brilliant. Both our characters, I should say. And then another player took on the mantle of the antagonist, and that really, I think, like what you said, like it allowed the other players in the LARP, to like have this thing to focus on.
I gave a lecture at Gen Con, not a lecture, I don't know what you call them. I guess a workshop, or when you go to the little seminars.
Right,
I
seminars.
led a seminar at Gen Con years ago. I was invited to talk about how to run a game at a convention, which I think is such a narrow topic for a
Right.
seminar. But I ran it anyway. I was happy to do it. It was fun. One of the things that I think, and you can back me up or you can argue here. One of the things I think that is so important when you're running something like this, where you're making pre-generated characters for people and you have a set story and it's going to run in 4 hours, and I'm talking about your original character. Um,
Yeah.
Casting is such an important part. Your experience is going to change in that opening 5 minutes when you're handing out characters based on who is playing what, because often players will show up and they'll want to play what they're used to playing. They'll want to play what's in their wheelhouse. But you don't know
Right.
who they are. If you don't know these people, you're handing them, here's the most important role I could hand to somebody. I hope you're not an asshole.
Right.
And I don't know if that's been your experience when you're running games at conventions, but it's certainly been mine that if you give the wrong character to the wrong person, your game's going to go nowhere.
You're completely correct. I think I remember the very first game I ran at Gen Con ever was World of Dew, and it's my Samurai Noir role playing game.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a player who, um, the way we set up the game was that there had been a murder. It was this very popular owner of a tea house. And the game is set in like, uh, the Tokugawa era, Edo era of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided to play the detective character. And he basically was super passive the entire game. And so it basically, the entire thing
Oh,
fell on me and like the other players to like get this guy to do anything.
yeah.
And so I basically sidelined the murder. I realized about 30, 40 minutes into it that this guy was not gonna like do anything except for like what I kind of like led him by the nose to do.
Right.
Um, and so I got the other players going, and I started creating conflicts and interesting things for them to do. And
Right.
we sort of like within about an hour and a half of the game solved the murder, but by doing so, we created this antagonist for a lot of the other players at the game, and we ran. And I basically shifted the engine from this murder mystery that focused on this lead character,
Right.
detective, to this like Ronin and this gambler character and their friends who were also supporting them. So yeah, you're completely right. If you give the wrong roles to the people, it just doesn't work. And um, yeah, I think we had a. I think part of what was so good about that game though with that character was that they hit it out the park when they chose who got what roles. Like they were pretty specific about like who got what. And yeah, even the guy who played my second in command, his character turned out to be like a coward, and his whole thing the entire time was trying to uh, use those resources that we had a very limited amount of to get a jump capable like transport ship and get the F away from everyone else and go hide. Like it's some like, random planet somewhere away from the Cylons.
Right.
And he basically was, if he had been able to do that, he would have uh basically stopped us from being able to like successfully escape from the Cylons or keep going. And he was trying to turn people against us. And this player was like fantastic at doing that job. A couple of the other players didn't do as great a job as like in their roles. I think like there was a person that ended up being like there was like the main doctor, and they ended up not